Welcome to my channel. Have you ever listened to people talk in English and felt like they are speaking too fast, using words you don't know, and making you feel left out? You want to join the conversation, but your mind is blank. You hear the words, but they don't make sentences in your head. It's frustrating, right? I know, because I was there. But here's the good news. You can learn how people really talk in English, and you can start today. This video is going to take you inside that world step by step, so stay until the end. And tell me in the comments, do you feel lost when people speak English? Chapter 1. The first time I noticed how people talk. I remember the day so clearly. I was sitting in a small cafe. The air smelled of fresh coffee and warm bread. I had my notebook in front of me, trying to write some English sentences for homework. Then, I heard a group of people talking at the next table. They were laughing, speaking quickly, moving their hands, making faces, and saying words I thought I knew, but I could not understand them at all. It was strange. I knew some English from school. I could read simple sentences. I could write, "My name is Adam," or "I have a book." But when I heard them talking, it felt like a different language. The words joined together. Some words disappeared. Sometimes they didn't finish sentences, but the others still understood. I sat there, frozen, listening. I wanted to join in, but I didn't even know where one word ended and the next began. In school, English was slow and clear. The teacher said every word carefully. We read from a book. Every sentence was perfect grammar. But in real life, it was different. People didn't speak like the book. They spoke like music. There was rhythm, a rise and fall in their voice, a kind of melody that my ears were not used to. I felt like I was looking through a window into another world, a world I wanted to enter but didn't have the key for. I thought, maybe I am not ready. Maybe I will never be able to speak like that. That thought made my heart heavy. I tried to catch a few words. I heard, kind of, and gonna. But in my English book, I never saw these words. I felt confused. Was this even real English? I thought I was learning the right way in class, but now I wasn't so sure. They were using simple words, but they were using them in ways I had never practiced. I realized something important that day. Learning English in books is not enough to understand how people actually talk. That was both scary and exciting. Scary because I didn't know how to learn that kind of English yet. Exciting because maybe there was a secret way, a different way to get there. I remember going home that day and lying in bed, replaying the conversation in my head. I couldn't remember every word, but I remembered how they smiled, how they used their hands, how their words flowed. I wanted that. I didn't just want to know English, I wanted to live in it. That was the moment I promised myself. One day, I will understand. One day, I will talk like that too. Chapter 2. Words are not enough. After that day in the cafe, I started paying more attention to the way people spoke in English. I noticed something surprising. Even when I understood the words, I still didn't always understand the meaning. That confused me even more. I thought that if I learned a lot of vocabulary, I would finally understand everything. But I soon realized it wasn't true. Words were just one part of the picture. How people put them together, the way they used their voice, and even their face and hands carried meaning too. Without these things, the words felt empty. It was like looking at puzzle pieces without knowing the picture they were supposed to make. One time, I heard someone say, "It's a piece of cake." I knew the word piece. I knew the word cake, but when I looked around, there was no cake on the table. Everyone laughed, and I had no idea why. Later, I learned that a piece of cake means something easy. That was the moment I understood people don't just use words for their dictionary meaning. They use them for feelings, for pictures in your mind, for things that only make sense if you have heard them before in real life. That was why my textbook alone could never prepare me for real conversations. I started to notice other things too. People often didn't speak in full, perfect sentences. In school, I learned to say, I am going to the market. But outside, I heard, gonna go to the market, or sometimes just gonna go. And somehow, everyone still understood. It wasn't just about grammar. It was about speaking in a way that matched the moment, the mood, and the people you were with. That was something my school never taught me, because real-life English is alive. It changes, it moves, and it bends the rules all the time. I began to see that talking in English was like dancing. You couldn't just memorize the steps. You had to feel the rhythm. Words were like the dance moves, but the music was tone, timing, and expression. Without the music, the moves didn't make sense. That's why some learners can know hundreds of words but still freeze in conversation, because they've learned the words, but not the music of the language. And I didn't want to be one of those learners. I wanted both the moves and the music. That's when I made a decision. I wasn't going to just memorize new words anymore. I was going to learn the way people actually used them. I was going to copy not only their sentences, but also their tone, their pauses, their little sounds like, well, and you know. Because I realized something powerful. If you want to talk like people talk in English, words alone are not enough. You have to learn the way they live inside the conversation. Chapter 3: The Speed Problem. Not long after I started focusing on the way people used words, I hit another wall speed. It felt like every native English speaker had pressed a fast-forward button on their mouth. I could catch the first word, maybe the second, and then the rest blurred together into one long sound. It wasn't like in school, where the teacher spoke slowly and clearly. Out in the real world, sentences moved like a river, flowing too fast for me to grab the words. I remember standing in line at a shop when the cashier asked something like, "Do you want a bag?" To me, it sounded like one word. My brain froze. I didn't even know what to answer. The person behind me laughed softly, and I felt my face turn red. Later, I realized they were simply asking, "Do you want a bag?" That was when I learned an important truth. Native speakers don't speak word by word. They link words together. "What are you doing?" becomes "What you doing?" "I am going to" becomes "I'm going to." And they don't even think about it. It's natural for them. But for learners, it feels like the words are disappearing. The truth is, they're still there, just hidden inside the flow. And that flow is what makes English sound fast. Once you know the patterns, you can start catching them, just like learning the rhythm of a song. At first, it felt hopeless. I thought, how can I ever understand if they speak this fast? But then I remembered something from my childhood. When you listen to your favorite song for the first time, you don't catch all the lyrics. You just hear the melody. But if you listen again and again, suddenly the words become clear. That's what I needed to do with English. I started listening to short conversations again and again, until my ears could hear the words hiding inside. I also realized I didn't need to understand every single word to follow the meaning. People often repeat the important part, or their tone tells you what they mean. For example, if someone says quickly, "Hey, how's it going?" You might only catch how and going, but you still know they are greeting you. The speed doesn't matter as much when your brain learns to look for clues. That was a huge relief for me because it meant I didn't have to slow everyone down. I just had to train my ears to speed up. From then on, I made it a habit to listen to real English every day, not just slow, clear lessons. I listened to people on the bus, in the park, on videos. At first, it felt like noise, but slowly, I began to catch more and more. The fast speech didn't scare me anymore. It became a challenge I wanted to win. And every time I understood a quick sentence without asking someone to repeat, it felt like a small victory. That's when I realized speed is not the enemy. It's just another step in learning how people really talk in English. Chapter 4. The Secret of Common Phrases. One day, while I was listening to a conversation between two friends, I noticed something strange. They kept saying the same little phrases over and over. Things like, "You know what I mean?" Or, "At the end of the day?" Or, "That's the thing." I had heard these before, but I never paid attention to them. That day, I realized these phrases were like glue. They held the conversation together. Even when they changed the topic, these same expressions kept coming back. I started thinking, maybe real English isn't about making new sentences every time. Maybe it's about reusing the same powerful phrases again and again. That night, I decided to test this idea. I wrote down 5 phrases I had heard that day. They were simple, but they sounded so natural. The next day, I tried using one of them. "You know what I mean?" When talking to a classmate in English. I could see their face light up, like they felt I was speaking in a more natural way. It worked. Suddenly, I didn't feel like I was searching for every single word. These phrases gave me a starting point, a ready-made piece of the conversation I could use anytime. The more I listened, the more I realized that native speakers have hundreds of these little building blocks. They don't think about grammar every time they talk. They just pull out a phrase that fits the moment. If they agree with someone, they might say, "Exactly," or "That's so true." If they want to change the topic, they say, "By the way," or "Speaking of." Once I understood this, I felt like I had discovered a secret doorway into real conversation. I didn't have to invent everything from scratch. I could use these building blocks to sound smooth and confident. I started making a phrase bank in my notebook. Every time I heard a useful expression, I wrote it down and practiced it. At first, it felt strange to repeat them, like I was copying someone. But soon, I realized that copying is exactly how we learn as children. We don't invent language, we hear it, we copy it, and then it becomes ours. Slowly, my brain stopped translating from my language and started pulling ready phrases straight from my memory. It was amazing how much this changed my confidence. When someone spoke to me, I didn't panic anymore. I had something ready to say a phrase that fit. And the more I used them, the more natural I sounded. That's when I truly understood. If you want to talk like people talk in English, you need more than just words. You need their favorite phrases, the ones they use every day without even thinking. That's the real key to sounding like you belong in the conversation. Chapter 5. How Feelings Change the Words. After I learned the power of common phrases, I started to notice something deeper. People didn't just use words. They filled those words with feelings. The same sentence could sound completely different depending on how it was said. I remember one day my friend said, "That's great," but her voice was flat and her face didn't smile. I could tell she didn't actually mean it was great. She was being sarcastic. If I had only listened to the words, I would have misunderstood. That's when I realized, in English, tone and emotion are just as important as the words themselves. This was a big challenge for me because in school, we only practiced reading and writing. We didn't practice feelings. Our sentences were always correct, but they all sounded the same. In real life, people's voices rise when they're excited, drop when they're serious, and change speed when they're nervous or angry. Sometimes they don't even finish the sentence, they just let the feeling do the talking. I had to train my ears to listen beyond the words, to notice the emotion hiding inside. I started paying close attention when people spoke. I watched their eyes, their mouth, their hands. I noticed how someone saying, "Really?" could mean surprise, doubt, or even boredom, all depending on their tone. I realized that when native speakers talk, they are always sending two messages at once, one through the words and one through the feelings. If you only hear the words, you miss half the conversation. One time, I tried this myself. I said, "Thank you," in 3 different ways: happy, disappointed, and tired. It felt strange at first, but it made me understand that speaking English isn't just moving your mouth, it's putting your heart into the sound. When I started using emotions in my voice, people reacted differently. They smiled more. They understood me faster. They could tell when I was excited or when I was joking. My English didn't just sound better, it felt alive. From that moment, I stopped thinking of English as something to say and started thinking of it as something to feel. Because when you feel the words, you connect with people, not just with a dictionary. And that connection is what makes conversations real. Chapter 6. Small Talk, Big Connection. I used to think small talk was useless. In my mind, if I was going to speak English, I wanted to say something important, something deep. Why talk about the weather or what you ate for lunch? But then I noticed something. Small talk was everywhere. In cafes, on buses, in the park, people use these short, friendly conversations to open the door to bigger ones. How's your day? It's cold today, isn't it? What are you having? These weren't big questions, but they made people smile. They started friendships. They made strangers feel comfortable. That's when I realized small talk wasn't small at all. It was the first step to real connection. I remember the first time I tried small talk in English. I was waiting in line for coffee, and the person next to me looked at the menu inside. Without thinking too much, I said, "Too many choices, right?" They looked at me, laughed, and said, "Yes, I never know what to get." Just like that, we were having a conversation. It wasn't about anything important, but it felt good. I wasn't frozen. I wasn't scared. I was part of the moment. That short exchange gave me more confidence than any grammar test I had ever passed. The beauty of small talk is that it's safe. You don't need perfect grammar. You don't need big words. You just need to notice something around you and say it. Native speakers do this all the time. They talk about the weather, traffic, the coffee, the game last night, anything that makes the other person feel included. I realize small talk is like knocking on a door. If you knock gently, people open it. Then you can step inside and have a bigger conversation. I started practicing small talk everywhere. In the elevator, long day, at the bus stop. The bus is late again. In the shop, this one looks fresh. Sometimes people answered, sometimes they didn't. But every time I tried, I felt braver. I learned that small talk is not about the topic, it's about connection. It's about showing you are open to speaking, that you're friendly, and that you want to share a moment. Now, I see small talk as a secret weapon for English learners. It's quick, it's easy, and it works anywhere. And the best part? Every time you use it, you are building a bridge, one short sentence at a time, to the kind of real conversations you dream of having. Chapter 7. Mistakes people make when talking. When I first started speaking English, I made every mistake you can imagine. I spoke too slowly. I used words from my dictionary that no one really used. And sometimes I tried to translate directly from my language, and the result was, well, strange. I once told someone, I will go to cut my hair house, because I was translating my language word for word. They looked confused for a moment, then smiled and said, "Oh, you mean the hair salon?" I laughed with them, but inside, I felt embarrassed. That's when I realized many English learners make the same mistakes. And it's not because we're bad at English, it's because we're learning how to make the language ours. One big mistake is speaking too formally in casual situations. I used to say, "Good morning. How do you do?" to people my age, and they would giggle because it sounded like I was reading from an old textbook. Native speakers in casual settings just say, "Hey, how's it going?" or "What's up?" That's why listening to real conversations is so important. It teaches you what fits the moment. Another mistake is using a sentence that is grammatically correct but sounds unnatural. For example, I once said, "I very much enjoyed the food you cooked." It was correct, but my friend simply said, "I loved the food you made." Shorter, warmer, and more natural. I learned that in English, sometimes less is more. You don't need to impress people with long sentences. You need to make them feel comfortable. And then there's the mistake of being too afraid of making mistakes. I know it sounds funny, but it's true. I used to stay silent because I didn't want to be wrong. But the less I spoke, the slower I learned. Every time I made a mistake and someone corrected me, it was like unlocking a new piece of the language. I started to see mistakes as teachers, not enemies. The more mistakes I made, the faster I improved. The best advice I can give is this: don't try to sound perfect. Try to sound real. Use words that people use every day. Listen to how native speakers talk in real life, not just in lessons. And when you make a mistake, smile, fix it, and keep going. Because in the end, no one remembers your mistakes as much as you do. They remember how you made them feel. Chapter 8. Practice like people talk. After all the mistakes and lessons I learned, I realized something important if I wanted to talk like people talk in English. I couldn't just study from a book. I had to practice like they do. That meant copying their style, their tone, and even their little habits when speaking. I started with something simple: listening to real conversations in TV shows, YouTube videos, and even podcasts. But I didn't just listen, I paused and repeated exactly what they said, trying to match their speed, their emotion, and the way they connected words. This method, called shadowing, became my secret weapon. It felt like I was acting in a movie scene, and the more I did it, the more natural my English sounded. At first, I was shy about speaking out loud when no one was around. But I reminded myself, if I can't talk to myself, how will I talk to others? So, I made it a daily habit. If I saw a cup, I'd say, "This is my cup." If I was cooking, I'd narrate, "I'm cutting the vegetables now." It may sound silly, but this kind of practice trained my brain to think in English without even noticing. The more I practiced like this, the faster my sentences came out in real conversations. I also practiced by imitating not just what people said, but how they said it. I copied their rising and falling voice, their pauses, their small laughs in between. I noticed how they didn't always answer directly. Sometimes they added, "Well," or "Let me think," before answering. I started using those too, and suddenly, I sounded more like them. It wasn't just about speaking English, it was about speaking their English. The best part was that I could do this anywhere in my room, on a walk, while waiting for a bus. I didn't need a teacher for this type of practice. And little by little, I stopped translating in my head. Words started to flow. I could join conversations without freezing because I had trained my mouth and my brain to work together in real time. That's when I understood. Practicing like people talk isn't just extra practice, it's the real practice. Books teach you the rules, but this kind of practice teaches you the game. And once you start playing like that, you're not just a learner anymore, you're a speaker. Chapter 9. Joining the Conversation. The first time I truly joined a conversation in English felt like magic. It wasn't planned, it wasn't perfect, and I didn't even realize it was happening until it was already happening. I was sitting with two friends in the park. They were talking about their weekend, and I was just listening, nodding, smiling. Then one of them turned to me and asked, "What about you?" For a moment, my old fear returned, that voice in my head saying, "Don't speak, you'll make a mistake." But instead of freezing, I heard myself say, "I went to the market. It was really busy, but I found some fresh strawberries." It was simple. It wasn't a big speech, but it was mine. And they laughed and continued the conversation as if I had always been part of it. In that moment, something changed inside me. I wasn't just watching the conversation from the outside anymore. I was in it. I could feel the rhythm, the flow, the back and forth. I noticed how my friends didn't stop to think about grammar. And for the first time, I didn't either. I just spoke. I understood them, they understood me, and that was all that mattered. It was like finally stepping into a room where the door had always been open. I just hadn't walked through it until now. I realized that joining a conversation isn't about waiting until your English is perfect. If you wait for perfection, you will be waiting forever. It's about taking that small step, even if it feels scary. It's about giving yourself permission to speak, even if you don't have all the right words. Every time you join in, you build confidence. Every sentence you speak makes the next one easier. Now, when I see people talking in English, I don't feel like an outsider. I feel curious. I listen for phrases I can use. I look for moments to add my voice. I've learned that conversations are not tests, they're connections. And the more you join them, the more you belong.